Where's Mattia?
Upstairs.
Upstairs?
Yep.
Coming?
He's on his way.
What's that?
He's on his way.
Is it? Okay, well, we'll establish himself. Sorry. Finish my lunch in 4 seconds. So, thank you. Yeah, that's fine, thanks. Just a couple of announcements before we get underway. Next week, I have to be at an all-day meeting in Northumbria or somewhere. I'm not sure where is it? Nottingham. It's an NO word.
It's not so distant.
It's up there, north.
Check it before you go.
Yeah, really. I'm going on a bus, so hopefully the bus is going to, although I once went on the plane, I got on the wrong plane, which is pretty impressive, because it's kind of hard to do that. I was arrested by Interpol. But I got on the wrong bus going to the planes. And it just so happened that there was a seat that was open, that was my seat, that was same seat number on this little tiny like Cessna type of plane, and they arrested me when I got off the plane because I was trying to and so it's very conceivable we'll get on the wrong bus and it'll end up, in, I don't know, France.
Just go on a train.
That's right, yeah, I guess you could just go on a train, but no, because they hired a bus that saved the university like 4p, or something like that. I digress. Anyway, so Mattia is going to take the seminar. Is that right?
Right.
No, not today. Yes, today. Next week. Yeah. And Mark, I thought I could also call upon you to assist, and anybody else that wants to jump into the fray. This is a meeting for the HRC holders, and they have some sort of thing they want us to do. It's annoying. But anyway, so I have to be there. Because probably they're going to... Are you filming this? Thank you. I love the HRC. Wonderful people. So great. Okay, anyway. So they're probably going to give us PhD training or something like that. You know, I mean, these make-work projects that just drive me insane. Okay, I'm past that now. I'm okay. I can breathe now. Okay, so on the 29th of October, we have the pleasure of having a really interesting artist come in who is showing her work at Tate on the 24th. Maybe she's giving a big lecture, but it's a 2-day lecture, or a 2-day exhibition or something on the 23rd and 24th and I think 25th of October. Her name is Jennifer Bajorek. She actually spoke at Greenwich a couple of years ago. I don't know if you remember her. She's
the hair.
the one with the hair?
The one that was replanted.
No. No, that was Paloma Trutnick. Yes. No, this is Jennifer Bajorek. 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 She is originally, I think in the States. She did her training. I guess, I'm not sure where she did her training actually, but I know that she ended up teaching in Cornell and Rutgers, and I think is linked with MIT right now, so that's kind of her trajectory. And I don't know the title of her work, but what I was going to suggest is, what I'd like to do is have her have her come in part of the way of our seminar. So either we do our seminar first or she does her talk first. Would you be happy with that, or would you want just to, because I think it's going to be, I think you'll get more out of it if it's a smaller group rather than we open it up to a public lecture, but I'm happy to go with whatever you say. What would you prefer?
So is this next week? Or
No, the 29th.
29th.
We can have it as well.
A small group? Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so she's coming. So the reason I'm asking that is that I don't want to disrupt our seminars too much, but I didn't know if we should do it during the seminar or after the seminar. Knowing that the seminar goes till 7.
Before the seminar?
Before the seminar, there's a CFAR meeting, which all of you are expected to come to.
What time is that?
That's 1 to 2. Yes.
We didn't know that.
No, I didn't.
What, every week?
What?
Every week?
No.
No, okay. Just checking.
Okay. Let us all begin again. This time, let me just get undressed. Okay, I'll start again. First of all, I don't know why nobody's in these messages. I just think that there is something wrong with the way in which people understand how to use email. Okay, so, because you've been on a variety of lists.
I
and-
haven't had that meeting. I haven't been informed about that.
Okay, well, according to one of the secretaries, who will remain unnamed, she has supposedly sent this to everybody, including the PhD students, but clearly that's not the case. So anyway, let's not labor this point. Every 6 weeks, on a Wednesday, from 1 to 2, will be a CFAR meeting. The CFAR meetings are to discuss the research, scenarios of the school, but also what you're all trying to link into, particularly if there is bids that are going on. So there are 8 research strands now called Centers of Excellence. Hello. And those are, those chairs are.
May I start with mine, as I do have a lot to shoot? So
Okay.
maybe I should,
Yeah, well, and let me just introduce you anyway. This is Professor Jo Longhurst, who winces when we say the word professor. She likes being a professor, but it's more important that you realize she's an artist. Though they're not mutually contradictory, are they? Yes. Anyway, Jo, she's fantastic, so we have
So
her.
I think I know lots of people here anyway, but for those of you I haven't met, just really to say hello. I can't stop today, but the Centre of Excellence that I'm heading is for artists using photography, and that's in the broadest sense. My work encompasses all sorts of lens-based media, and I'm actually putting together some large funding bids at the moment, which is why I have to dash and I'm not joining in these lovely discussions right now, but hopefully anybody who wants to work within that area wants to talk about projects and proposals and ideas for doing things, then come to me. And I'm also,
You're going to keep that name, are you?
I don't know.
Okay.
Contemporary photographic practices is what the name suggested, but
It's boring.
the way that everybody's eyes glazed over at the last CFAR meeting when it was suggested, I think people then think it's for photographers, and no one here is really purely a photographer,
Yeah.
so that would really be a very small group.
Yeah.
So it's open to discussion really. But I'm also available for tutorials, and I occasionally do sign-up sheets, although at the moment I'm doing a lot of one-to-ones with my own students. But shortly I'll be doing open sign-up sheets again if anyone wants to see.
And this is Barnaby.
Barnaby, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so, can we, do you have time for us to do just a quick whip around so people can introduce themselves to you, or you have to race?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, very quick.
very fast.
Okay, so I'm Ed McKeon. I'm working on music curation as an area of practice and an area of theory.
And you also work with Conservatoire.
I've seen your emails, Ed. Yeah.
Oh, most likely. I'm nominally registered at the School of Media. I've kept myself. I work professionally in the field, and I know most people who deal in new music in the country. So I've kept myself out of that field. So I find it more interesting to work with people who have a different language and have a different take on an area that I feel that I'm familiar with.
Great.
Kate Takish, I done the undergraduate degree in drama at Newman and local Lacan drama.
And still we
Work
got,
on, I didn't even hear that. Lacan.
it gets buzzed out. That's right. No, just, I'm sorry, but we still love her. We've known her for a few years now.
I'm Lily, first year PhD student doing curating Chinese contemporary art in the UK.
I didn't hear you either. Curator?
You gotta shout, because something happens between here and
There's
then.
a fan or something.
Curating Chinese contemporary art in the UK.
Okay.
I'm Albert, I'm a first year PhD student. I'm a painter, but in the next month I'll be mostly interweaving photographies. So yeah, maybe I'll
Let's talk.
Good.
ask for some advice.
I know Lauren.
Yes, you do.
I know Stuart. I know
Tamsin.
Yeah. I know Dane.
I'm Sally, I've just finished my MA as well, painter, in the process of applying for PhD.
Although you actually use photography in your practice, don't you?
I do paint from photographs. Yeah, so I use photographs as a source material.
That's all right. If you can say who you are.
Okay. I'm from China and I'm middleware design. Middleware design, yeah. That's the first year PhD.
Actually, it's really wild designs, I have to say, and you're being very gentle and
Yeah.
modest about your work, I must
because the
say.
Chinese middleware brand is very, very underdeveloped. So I want to find some way to create something.
Okay, that didn't make it sound
Let's
less
switch
modest.
to
That's
drawing.
right. Okay.
I'm Chris. How do I introduce myself?
Just introduce yourself.
I'm Chris.
You're a CFAR fellow.
A CFAR fellow.
Postdoc.
I have interest of both in transition spaces and emotional absence. I use very interdisciplinary but not painting. No painting.
No painting. Okay, good.
Yeah. I'm stressing about granting the PhD now. So that's
Excellent, well done. That's good. Third year.
I'm Mariam and first year PhD student. I'm interested in interactions between jewelry, science and technology and using the kitchen as a laboratory to produce
Okay, you're still artist in residence here. Our long-standing artist in residence.
Gay.
Oh, you know Gay.
Hello. I'm
Okay.
Gay. I'm doing my thing. Still doing my proposal. I've just begun my PhD. I'm interested in notions of identity and post-human, human, and where that's leading at this present moment in time.
Post-human.
Yes, because I think there's a lot of talk about post-human and it linking with other species or technology, things like that, but I'm actually interested in what happens to the human part of post-human and how that's represented and understood, if that makes sense.
A little bit. Yeah, that's good. Barnaby, can you just give it a snapshot?
Yes, I'm studying the correlations between auditory culture and the writings of George Bataille and giving his oeuvre a listening to see if it helps make any sense, whether the sense is what we should be making it to be.
And Mark?
We know.
Okay, great.
Cool.
Okay, thanks.
Well,
Thanks,
enjoy,
Joe.
Yeah, enjoy the seminar.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Sorry that we had to do such a quick wait around. May I say, anyway, so Jennifer Bajorek is coming on the 29th. So there's the CFAR meeting at 1 that goes till 2. And either we'll have her before or after the seminar or during, depending on her also schedule. She might have to fly out that evening. Okay, so that's that. And I'm going to Bremen tomorrow, my sins, Germany. I'm going to a place called Devil's Moor, where there's a think tank, I know, honestly, where there's a think tank going on against speculative realism, so I'm ecstatic. Sadly, the person I'm flying with is Lacanian. Anyway, I feel right. But it should be, there's 12 of us, so we're going to create a little response. It's a 3-day think tank happening in some weird castle. And it's called psychomaterialism, so it's like, I don't know what possessed me to do this, but I'm sure it'll be interesting. Okay, and then on the 5th, something is happening. What is happening on the 5th? I don't know, but it's on the 5th, something's happening, sorry about that. And on the 10th, I will come to remember it. On the 10th is Zizek. And for those of you that are going to Zizek, can you stay behind so I can print off your tickets for you, so you can just have them, or we can do it next week. Eventually pay me £5, please. Whenever. Okay. Shall we begin? Sally? Did you want to say something?
No, I was just
Oh, I know
glasses
there's something else I
from
had to
my
say, which is that the AHRC PhD Awards, that's the more important thing, has just now been launched again. So for the M3C. So for those of you that would like to apply, you know who you are. Go to the M3C doctoral training website and load down the application. Also, I'm wondering, for those of you that are AHRC here, would you mind if I could pass your applications to those that are applying, or do you find it confidential? Is that okay? Okay, good. It's, brutal, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't try. It's going to be even worse this year for a number of reasons, but we still try. So we'll do that. Okay, now we can begin. So we left off last week in the middle of a slog with our friend Kant. And, by the way, Jakob sends his apologies. He's teaching today. I'm not sure if there's anybody else who should send apologies. Sophie sends her apologies in a general sense because she's very ill, and so she's taking off the next 2 semesters, and she'll be back with us in 2 semesters or so. But she's fine. She's just not fine. She'll be fine. But so she sends her love to everybody, and I told everybody I send your love back, so don't worry. Okay, now let us continue. I would like to know what you are hearing from the Kantian move, because I was worried about the work last week, but then maybe I just was worried for no real reason. And I really am curious as to what you are getting from what we're looking at and how you think it relates to the Foucauldian move. So there are 2 positions that are being thrown out, and without trying to rehearse all of it from last week, just to remind you that certain words like architectonic ought to play very large in your analysis because of the way in which the notion of synthetic operates with the notion of architectonic. And synthetic is an interesting forerunner to matrix. It's an interesting forerunner or lateral runner to a priori unities that would accompany things like dialectical reasoning. Who wants to begin? Let me just try to pull this up. The other thing is, if you find it useful, we can always put this on the board. We now have that working. Would it be useful for you to be able to read off the board?
Yeah.
It would be. Yeah. Okay. So, Katia, since you're,
Yes.
I heard that.
No, the here.
No, what I was going to say, do you have a way in which you'd like to, could someone just turn that on up there? Is it on? Did you turn it on?
Do I have a way?
Would you like to begin to summarize this, or shall we just,
Well, I've been trying to, last week, I thought, I'm going to read the whole critical judgment by next week. It's 300 pages, it fits, and...
you thought that last week?
Yes.
Wow, but you've been reading all summer.
Yes, but I still did not get past page 106. But I really got hooked onto the third moment of the analytic of the aesthetic judgment. Because, to sum it up in one sentence, it makes purpose the fundamental dimension of givenness.
Sorry, before you summarize that aspect, actually I was hoping that, did anybody have anything to say about what we were asked to look at directly?
I asked a question. We asked a question about
Thanks.
what is faculty.
Can you shout?
Yeah,
Because
can everyone hear me? What is a faculty?
Yeah.
John said, what is a faculty? A faculty of cognition. Right at the beginning. So a faculty, another way of saying faculty is capacity or potentiality. This is what interested me. The idea of potentiality drags the whole thing back to Aristotle and the actuality and the potentiality. Aristotle said that by nature things try to actualize their potentiality. The potentiality of something is quite interesting because it's kind of the non-existing existing. It's a kind of nothing or an absence, potential. You know, what is, when we go around the class and we say, what are you? What are you? And you say you're an artist or this, that, or the other. This is really sort of agree with Aristotle's idea of potential against his detractors who said that no, the artist is the artist, or the musician is the musician when they're playing, when they're performing. But no, we've absorbed this idea of potentiality. I am an artist, even outside the performance. So the potentiality is the capacity, is the faculty. The
How would you-
capacity.
Am I allowed to chip in, or
Of course.
question? How would you differentiate potentiality from affordance?
Affordance, yeah.
So affordance is the use of an object to reason. In a sense that an object isn't necessarily something just to comprehend, but it's a tool. So it's thinking of things in the world as tools, and therefore something can be purposed in a particular way. So in a sense, it has potentiality to be able to be used or to become something through the agency of the subject.
Starting with an object, isn't it? That's related. Well, I think what you're saying is that one of the things
Can you move in a little bit further?
Senses, why don't the senses sense? You say? Why don't the senses sense? Without that object, your word for
Affordance.
without the affordance of the object, there's no sensation. He said, what is this? This is where he starts then to talk about the idea of potentiality, because it's not realised. It's just this kind of absence, in presence in absence. This potentiality is there, but it's not there. And then he says that things try to actualise in nature that potentiality. Or that perfection is another way of saying that. Things drive towards that perfection in this idea of potentiality in us, in the capacity within us. So this where then he says things like art imitates nature. What he's saying there is art imitates the creative power of nature. That's what it's saying. So it helps lend itself towards the actualisation of the potentiality of something. So if you think of clothes as an art, of weaving it an art, you know, our skin will protect us to a certain extent, but clothes help us to move in other ways. That helps towards that perfection, whatever perfection is, or the actualisation of what it is to be human. This idea of capacity. And why it's interesting to me is because it's this invisible visible, it's the non-existing existent, it's the unveiled, it's the veil in Heidegger. It's in the fourfold of Heidegger, we sort of like the earth, that which is hidden within, and it's that which has to be potential. So when we just explore this notion of the faculty and the capacity, so when Kant says we have this capacity, this faculty of cognition, it's this strange presence in absence that has to be then realised. And it's that kind of what Chris was saying about it being interested in absence, this kind of presence of the non-existing existing in the same way.
How does that escape?
Let me just jump in there, because I think what might clarify it a little bit more is that, if this ever starts to work, is that in a certain sense the potential you would link to the notion of quality, and the way in which one would understand almost like the utility of something is its quantity. So in Kant's work, he's always having this relation between quality and quantity, so that one can think potentiality in quantity, but it's a different kind of potentiality. It's like the hammer can make something, a sound can create something, but the quality, which then leads to the faculty, or the other way around, depending on how you make the argument, allows one to invent as opposed to discover. And the invention puts something on the sort of within one's grasp, but not quite there, but one heads toward it in the fulfillment of the possibility of its perfection. So I'm not saying that one should be doing this. The takeaway from this is that is the critical distinction between quantity and quality that starts to come in through sort of the back door here. And what Mark is pointing out around potentiality or faculty is when you think about the way in which a ground can work without it actually being present, without it actually being obvious. I don't know what's happening to this thing and why it's not working. They've just fixed this machine, which means now that doesn't work. Anyway, does anybody have any clue as to why there's no signal?
Cable connection. solutions. Because we had the same problem yesterday, and that was the point.
Just, is it working now? No.
I was also thinking about this potentiality in terms of the movement, the equal to the Maserati or the equal to the oak. The equal to the Maserati.
Oh, you don't know.
Oh, ta-da! Wonderful. Dane, can you just fix that so that it doesn't go crooked? Nope, too far down.
Back up,
A little bit higher.
just a touch.
That's it.
And could we move that camera a bit?
Yeah, can you move the camera so that we can take a photo of Barnaby and Mark? Okay. Thank you. Okay, now we've got it set. Perfect. Right.
Shall I just finish this point about the
Yes, please.
There's two kind of potentialities. A generalized potentiality when you might say a child could become head of state, something like that, or something that might learn how to play a musical instrument. But there's an alteration involved, kind of pain, that you have to go through that. And the other kind of potentiality, and the one that really I'm talking about, is that which has, it'd be like saying to me, perform music or something, it'd be like falling off a log, it would be easy kind of thing. It's that kind of potentiality which is easy. It is, if you say to me, say something about Kant's theoretical philosophy, I could do it, okay? If you ask me something about the Kant problem, there's an alteration required. It's possible, but there's an alteration, or physical alteration, there's trouble, there's strife, there's education involved. So these two kinds of general, there's a general potentiality, and then there's this other kind of potentiality that becomes actualized. And I think because it's important because it's at the root of the Kant, this idea, you see, Aristotle, there's a drive or a tendency towards this kind of actualization, which is what all this is about in the Kant, this drive towards looking for the good, the agreeable, and eventually for the teleological and finality, reflective concepts in the second half of the critique of judgment. That all these together are sort of kind of grounded, if you like, in this Aristotelian movement, which you can then trace back to Heraclitus, and everything is change, everything is fluid, everything is in flux, and where it comes up in what I call bilious lumps, which is unhelpful, but where it kind of solidifies is around these ideas of this around the pleasure or the emotion or the feeling of something, which of course is the ephemeral and was always attacked in the philosophy of history and tried to replace by something with more substance, like logic or something that doesn't require emotions or something. So this groundless ground looks very much like Leibniz monad or Heideggerian perdurance, the standing of nothingness, where it's a kind of emotional base to your understanding, which, because it's just emotion, is just contingent and sort of
free floating.
Yeah. So that's why I thought that the idea of this idea of Kenneth Roth, this faculty of potentiality, naturality, and the movement of the whole business, and the link to the roots of philosophy, which interests me, is interesting. And also the way that art lends itself to the realization of what is possible. Art to me says about what is, the possibility about how we might change the world. Something like that. That might be too grand, but art to me speaks of possibility or something. Maybe utopia, but utopia is painted black, this kind of thing. The darkness. Once again, we're into that absence of the potentiality of something. It's absolutely absent. It's actually kind of darkness. It actually shows a kind of dark face. This is what the kind of thing that interests me.
So I think that one of the things just to draw your attention to then, just to try and recap this so that those of you that are very new at hearing philosophical terms and like perdurance or whatever it is, or even the word Heidegger, that you don't get too thrown. Notice that universities use faculty. Like we just have a faculty. Now that is, any university that tends to use those terms have at least pretensions on following an enlightenment path. So that's kind of interesting because the faculties of any kind are trying to speak back to the Kantian mood that's going on here. Now, there's big debates because there's a lot of times when universities get rid of faculties And a lot of times they replace them with colleges or schools or something else altogether, departments. And sometimes you telescope down. So you can think within the university itself as an entity, the word university becomes a groundless ground. And what makes the university a university is the degree to which its faculties are operational and aspirational. So it's like both of those kind of things without closing down. In other words, on the one hand, it has to pass knowledge, usual particular sets of knowledge. On the other hand, it can't be carved in stone, those knowledges. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in a faculty. You'd be in a school. So so just try and see if you can balance and you can play with this notion of the faculty and how it operates. Yeah.
There is something in every
Thanks,
time we have to refer to potentiality and actuality. I am always extremely uncomfortable with it because it is something that is, to me, it's always open to having already there in waiting what will happen. And I think that the great advantage of Kant's proposal is that it's precisely to avoid that problem by turning the question what into the question how.
Yes.
So,
which is changing the moment of discovery to the moment of invention.
yes.
Because you're not digging down to find something hidden like an essence.
Yes. But even more so, the digging down implies linearity and intentionality maybe as well, and still with the two ends, 2 points of subject and object. And I really see these visually as taking this line and opening it to make it kind of plain. So this faculty is more akin to me. Maybe it sounds a bit theoretic from you. It's more akin to me to a sort of openness. It's the fact that it's like the mind, because after all, he really speaks about individuals. It's plastic, it's malleable, and therefore can. But what it can is no longer the question. So potentiality becomes, in a certain way, entirely absent.
Remember I said it was two kinds of potentiality. I think you're linking onto one kind of potentiality, the one that requires a degree of alteration or suffering or education to get there, which is the way you get to the other potentiality. Your performance as an artist, that would be the ready to hand, as it were, within Heidegger. The thing that would be like falling off a log to performance. But I think we're describing that other kind of potentiality. That might be wrong.
I mean,
And also you were doing very much in the theoretical spirit of subject-object, certain exaggeration within philosophy of Kant, which philosophy may well be, kind of exaggeration.
what is it draw your attention to is a very famous sentence of Kant's, which is task becomes duty, duty becomes free. Have you heard this before? A lot of times it's written on top of prisons. It's like sad. Just like obedience to the law is freedom. That's another one. That's Rousseau. That's often in American prisons. You see that across the obedience to the law is freedom. What is meant there is not obey the law, or you otherwise you get caught and end up in jail, which is how it's often misinterpreted. But it means that if you recognize that you have a duty to yourself, and let's say by extension others, to suffer in that sense, but just not to suffer like the whole masochist thing, but literally to throw yourself in a quandary where you don't know. You have a duty to throw yourself into an opening where you can really learn what it is to know. And to know is not to memorize, or is not to have arithmetic lessons. To know is to actually embody something that allows you to put forward a path, a set of ways of becoming that in the path and in the end point of the path, which of course is never reached, is freedom. Not that you can never have freedom, I don't mean that you never reach freedom, but that there's no closure to freedom. So I think it gets badly interpreted by sort of a Derridian move, which suggests always democracy to come. There's always a democracy à venir. And it's really not meaning you're heading in a direction you can never get it. The Slavoj Žižek makes a similar argument. One has an object of desire, but once you get to your object of desire, then you cease desiring it because now you're bored or whatever the thing is. It's not at that level. Kant is not directing it that way. What he's saying is that it can never be closed because once you close it, you kill it. So the openness is precisely what is the feature of the research. It's the feature of the answer. It's the feature of the resolution, which is to say there's no resolution. Any questions on that so far? Because everyone moved pretty quickly.
Is this got some relation to the Foucauldian thinking terms?
Yes. Lily? What are you hearing? Half-life, that's great.
Carry on. It's always open-ended. You never fully reach zero.
Okay, I can see why you're thinking that, but that's allowing, but that's not correct. I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm just saying that it. This way. Come back.
Give it a second.
Okay, it's searching. No, the reason is, I can understand why you might think it's like a half-life, and then it's like Zenos paradox. So you go so far, and then you go half that far, and then you go half that half, and then you go half that half, and eventually you never get anywhere. So he's not saying that. What he's saying is that if you use something, no, let me start again. In order to make something meaningful, it has to have a stable sense of use, sense of being able to talk about it. If I use words that don't make any sense, at some point you're going to go, I don't understand this, forget it, it's stupid, something like that. And if I do this all on a continual basis, unless you're forced to take the class, you would leave, right? So there's something about the plurality of the communication and the shared, let's use the word terrain here, that allows one to communicate. That's step one. That shared terrain you can call a ground. That shared set of assemblages you could call a ground. But if you call it a ground, one has to be very careful on how it's called a ground because it will sound solid. When in fact it's an assemblage of things that allow one to think coherently. So it's the assemblance that allows the coherence, not the fact that it is stuck together as such, not that it's that solid. So that the first step to this is that he's suggesting that if that ground ever solidifies or ever becomes like petrified wood, something like that, then there's no way to have free thinking from that. And so he will say that it's not so much that you can never reach it, but if you do reach it, you've killed it. Something like that. Anybody else want to take a stab at what you're hearing? Because I want to make sure you really get this, because now we're going to
Tying into the word in concept, the word concept, Kant says that the concept actualizes the object.
Right.
The object it brings it to life. But the concept itself comes from it's a neologism.
neologism.
It's a new word. It's
Yeah.
a new word. How can I say that?
Neologism.
Yeah, so it's a new word made up by Leibniz. Because they were having trouble, everyone was using the word idea, and it was getting very confusing. So Leibniz came up with this word, which in German is Begriff, which gets translated into concept. But it means in German grasping something, to hold. So when you talk about this grasping, to hold something, that's what this concept is, that's what Johnny is saying, that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, that's right. But I didn't want to use the word concept,
No.
so I want to use the word
No.
ground.
Yeah.
Okay.
There is
Secretly.
you do try to use the radical words, and I fall back on the classical. I do.
Thank you. That's, we make a good team here. Okay, however, try and remember the radical side. Because the reason I said it is because Hegel's going to take the word concept and run with it a very different way than Kant. So for the time being, just think to yourself, a ground allows a certain way of thinking things through, and so that you can make it steadfast, or make it in fact true. I say true with quote marks because the truth is what becomes, the truth is what comes out of this is, or it is the is. So, I borrowed your water for something. Okay, so, like I was saying before, so you have this water, and we would say that the truth of this water in this example is this big, but if we go like so, then its sort of ground encompasses this other little part, even though they're not technically attached. It's the whole piece that comes together. This is still so the edge of the truth of this water at the moment goes all the way to here, or to here, to here, to here, to here, to here. The water can't exceed itself. The water is itself. See that? So it doesn't go more than, so in this concept, the ground, or the concept as at its very low level of understanding, is just saying you can't get beyond itself. It is what it is. The old Gertrude Stein scenario, a rose is a rose. You cannot get beyond it. It is what it is. It is the is. Now the is isn't anywhere. Grab the is, it's gone. So it's a weird ground. Breath? Did you breathe or did Kate? It's me. Okay. Did you want to say anything or just breathe?
No, I was just thinking that's language you're talking about.
Yes. Keep that on your hat. Okay, or under your hat. Just picture that this water can't go beyond itself. The sound can't go beyond itself. The curatorial moment can't go beyond itself. You can't curate outside the realm, no matter how far you put those pictures, even if you put them in China, in Brazil, and wherever, that's still in the same thing. It doesn't go beyond itself, okay? So it's part of this. Now, as a result, this kind of ground, yes, it came back, this kind of ground is what one would say constitutive. It's not solid. It might look solid, like here it looks a little solid, there it looks less solid. But it's sticking together somehow. We don't know how yet. We don't know how come. How come that ground and not some other ground? Why that one and only that one and no other of that one? That's the only one. That's the only one that can ground that thing. That's it. And so therefore that is its truth. This doesn't tell you a lot. Yes, Alberto.
I don't know, might be banal or simply wrong, but I kind of tend to think of ground also as a game, like
No, it's
the same thing, like the fact that it's not really important the reason why you ended up doing a game with those rules, but as far as using the game, that's the only thing that exists.
Yes.
And you're free in the game when you understand the rules, and the rules are part of your enjoyment.
Yes. Yes, or even non-enjoyment, depending.
Yeah, or you're losing, whatever, but I mean, it's part of
the game.
Yeah.
And Leotard develops that, and he calls it just gaming. For him, in fact, there's a whole book on it called Just Gaming, and it's about how truth is in fact an economy, and this economy is taken together to create this kind of thing, and it has all sorts of rules in it. Breath.
Could you take the same idea as the idea of an exhibition, or the idea of a concert? In a sense, it becomes a piece of you. So Joshua Bell doing his thing, busking in the tube station in New York, did it the first time. Nobody knew that he was this world-famous violinist, so people just kind of walked off past because they're busy people. It was an interesting experiment. It kind of pissed him off and ruined his career to an extent. So he's done it again and advertised in advance that he was going to go and do this. Got 3,000 people turning up to see him do it. But in a sense, it's only because the frame has already been created when he's on stage that he is that, and therefore the music is what it is. Otherwise, it's just some arsehole playing violin and annoying me because I'm trying to get somewhere. And to a similar extent, you could say with various different works, whether it's in an exhibitionary frame, that becomes the manner through which an artwork becomes what it is, because it's That's one way of.
Right, and that would not be what Kant is saying.
No.
Okay, but it was a very good example of what Plato would be saying.
Okay.
That there is a kind of a way to create like a category, a framing, and then it either fits in the frame
Yep.
or it doesn't fit in the frame, in which case it's not part of that frame. That's a little bit horrible way of putting Plato, but anyway, but I can see why you would make that argument, but think of frame as a cough.
Yep.
Okay, or as a sound, and it has like a cloud aspect to it. It's that kind of frame. It's not the frame that's so solid that you have this thing called, let's say, reputation, which is a category.
Yeah.
You have something else going on. Now, Kant is going to talk about categorical imperatives, but we'll let that rest. I just try and think.
Unless it's like a vibration. I mean, any sound, it's
Yeah.
it spills out from wherever it is. Some of it will be reflected. You get some frequencies that come back depending on the furnishings that are in the space. And
That's
it's-
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so if it's a game, if it's an economy, then it can change, and it doesn't matter that the guy is known or not known, actually.
Yeah.
And it's not like it shouldn't matter, it just doesn't matter, it has nothing to do with it. The game itself does something else. That's what we're getting at here.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep pushing it a little bit.
That's fine.
But is this not Kant calls it transcendental?
Yes, but don't go there yet. Yes, it is. We're going to the transcendental. That's exactly that's the next move, literally. But I want to make sure that everybody gets this ground. We open the book to the actual page. Because the ground gives you your right to go forward. It gives you an ethical, political, aesthetic way in. Now, of course, you have a groundless ground, that's kind of complicated, but it's not impossible. But you need to understand, like, what makes you think, let's say as a curator, that what you're putting together works. I mean, at the end of the day, you can say, well, it just does. I mean, trust me, I'm a curator, something like that. Okay, that's not going to necessarily work, but why would some things gelling together work and some others don't? Kant is he's trying to give tools to how one can understand what it is that creates the strength of its truth, the strength of its meaning. Now, before we get into the transcendental, which is definitely the next move, transcendental, transcendental, try and just answer one last question. What is the difference then between, if we know that the ground is heterogeneic, what's the difference between asynthetic, or I was going to say an a priori synthetic unity and a ground? Sorry about that. What's the difference between an a priori synthetic unity and a
Ground is a method. The a priori synthetic unity is a characteristic.
close? How did you come up with ground as a method?
I'm sort of hearing things slightly differently, sort of hearing through this. And it seems to me that what Kant's trying to do is to take a project from faith and towards scientific inquiry,
Right.
and to present the grounds for inquiry, the ground for inquiry. He's effectively deconstructed or constructed a set of formal rules for inquiry, which is why your example is precisely non-Kantian, because in Kant's world it wouldn't matter whether the violinist had a reputation or not, because assuming he had talent, well, he's the same person, he's playing the same piece of music, but he would have formally fulfilled all the formal obligations of the inquiry, and therefore the result should be an aesthetic experience.
Right.
You know, your example is why Kant is a refutation of Kant effectively, because there's only grounds in one of the examples. so what he's doing is he's mimicking. It's a mimesis or mimetic project of the move towards scientific inquiry, with
Yes.
formulating rules into alchemy, becoming chemistry.
And he's trying to bring in the senses, the sensuousness.
Yes, yeah.
And what is
Well,
sensuous?
yes, because that's what he's trying to organise.
Yes,
is
and-
the experiential moment of, whether it's the sublime and everything.
So why is he so annoyed with the empiricists who are, and the skeptics?
Because it's too woolly, and it's too.
Well, but they put
because you can
forward
say, well,
experience.
it's just why is that wonderful? It just is precisely what he's that belongs to the church. That's the kind of the moment of
Which one belongs to the church?
the what he's trying to move away from. Why is that wonderful? Why is the sunrise magnificent? It just is, or to put it another way, because God made it that
Right.
way. So what he's moving away from, and what this project is no, that's not good enough. It's not good enough just to say it is, or because God made it. So I'm going to break that down and see why is the sunset good? Why is it good?
But not so much why, but how is it that it's
How
put
exactly
together?
what Matthias said, yeah.
Yeah.
Not from the what to the how.
From the what, or from the why to the how?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're not allowed to use why. I mean, I
No
learned
why.
that early.
No why.
early
Why
on.
is
No why.
Basically,
Yeah.
what he was saying is, Kant seems to me to try to not rely on the principle of self-evidence, which has been
Just faith.
the support, faith, I believe, has been the support for all the axioms.
Can everybody hear back there? Can you hear?
Can you speak
Yeah.
up a bit?
The
Yeah.
Kant tries to move away from, or rather to build a method that does not need to rely on the principle of self-evidence, which had been the justification of axioms since the beginning of thought, since Euclidean geometry. So, if what is self-evident is no longer valid, therefore all the other buildings of methodology no longer stand. And in this sense, the empiricists are particularly annoying for or favorable, because they would always, like Hume was skeptical about inferring inferential processes, but then trusted the inner voice. So what I feel inside myself, inside my body, that I cannot be wrong about it because it's inside me. And likewise, the innate ideas of the rationalists, they are self-evident, we have to have them. And Kant moves from that, and actually does not reject those moments, but turn them from the why question to the how question.
Right. Yes. So in turning from so look at it this way. First, sort of a more gentle way into Kant. Get rid of the how. Get rid of the why question. If you start asking yourself, why does X happen, you're not approaching a Kantian analysis, and by the way, you're probably not approaching any other scientific knowledge either. Because the why question eventually only ever leads back to God. That's what it leads back to. Why is the sky blue? Well, because the rays do this and that. Why do the rays do this and that? Because God. Because eventually, there's only so far back that you can go before you hit the wall of God. So if you actually want to see how the elements get put together, you have to look at that they're put together, or how they're put together, or the way in which they're put together. This is, of course, the very early stages of deconstruction, this notion of constructing, how things get put together. And it's not just enough to say how they get put together, it's about how in the putting together, a marker is set out so that one can make claims and develop claims that are not just your opinion versus somebody else's opinion. At the end of the
And share the ground.
and share the ground.
Once you've agreed a set of rules and that they're transferable onto other people's experience, then you can start to compare the experiences,
Right.
And you've got a kind of quantifiable measure, which is, another way of saying grounds.
You have grounds, exactly.
Grounds for comparison.
But for Kant, the grounds are quality, not quantity. Just keep remembering that. Quality, not quantity. Sensuousness, not empiricism. If you have to do these divisions, which we'll get over in a bit. So the next thing to then make sure you understand is if you circle back to his enlightenment, his work on the Enlightenment and the way in which he's talking about how one has to get out of the non-age, or what he calls the age of immaturity, and make a stand, take a stand. This is about the exit. This is about knowing where to go, what area, in what way can you go in what direction, and so on and so forth. To know what direction you should go in when you can't see where you're going is complicated, right? I don't know, has anybody ever driven in fog or snow or anything like that? It's scary, actually, especially if you're in a fast-moving car, you know, on a highway. I was in Canada at the time when my really serious whiteout scenario happened, and I was in a white Volkswagen Beetle bug type of thing, and it was so cold that the back fender broke off from the cold, from the ice, and it was a huge snowstorm. I had to stop the car and find the fender, which was a white Beetle, so this didn't help. Anyway, and pack it on to the car with the snow, and then continue driving, because to stay would have meant certain death. You would have frozen to death. So you had to keep driving, but it was a highway, and you couldn't see anything. You couldn't see anything. And you were driving at, you know, at least 30 miles an hour. Now, I just hoped I didn't run into anything. An animal, another car, something like that. And I knew that I had to be going in a certain direction, because I could kind of see a little bit of light, and so I was following a compass kind of thing. How'd you go through it? You know, drive. You've driven through whiteouts or fog.
Fog, yeah.
And how did you go through it?
Very dangerously try and find somebody else's lights ahead of you.
So you hook onto some kind of logic, and you think, although I used to know somebody who, whenever she got lost, she'd go, oh, we'll follow that car. That car in front looks like they know what they're doing. Follow that one. You're like, well, you're going in the same direction. The reason I say this is because how do you know what direction to go in with your research? I mean, at some point you're going to be casting around. You're going to be thinking about what you're doing, and eventually you've got to stop casting around and begin the process of really coming up with a question. How are you going to do it? I mean, one of the things that's interesting about your work, which you've still got to figure out how to put it so that it is as fabulous as it is, because it is a lot more interesting than the way you're able to explain it, is what is it that drives you to question this thing around the knitting, this thing around the interstices, the ways in which the fabrics work, don't work, and so on and so forth. What is it that's driving that? So Kant is saying, look, here's a way in to understand how to do this. Recognize that what lies before you as a ground doesn't go any deeper than that. Just a surface. Now Wittgenstein develops this, as we know. But something comes before the ground for Kant. And it's a synthesis. It's what he calls an a priori before the time, an a priori synthetic unity. So let's just remember this phrase, a priori synthetic unity, and then we'll get to transcendental. The notion of synthetic, how do you think that differs from the notion of the analytic? Or does it?
It's a proposition that's not proven by its own terms. So you have to, you have to make a journey in order to be able to prove it. So,
Okay, close. That's close. Yeah, that's good. That's good. What were you going to say? That's good.
They differ in the sense that an analytical judgment is something that it is a judgment or a statement that can be made just by the definition of what everyone is judging about. So as I was saying, it's very close to what synthetic.
Did everybody hear that? So say it again. An analytic judgment does what?
Is a statement that can be made just out of the definition of what everyone is discussing.
Right.
all bachelors are unmarried.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, synthetic needs
Some are more unmarried than others. Anyway.
Synthetic instead needs to add extra information from outside the original concept.
Right. And how does it add? How does it know what to add? Or how? I mean, there's no brain.
That's what I believe that my take is what philosophy does. It's constantly discussing how this extra information comes into
the picture.
It comes into the picture.
So what is it, why a priori? What's a priori? Give me an example of a priori in Kant.
Time and space.
Yes.
As forms of
For example.
For example. But because it's the...
And why are they a priori? Why doesn't that just say God?
No.
Time and space, God.
Turns them around, it turns these around from the early scientific image, the Newtonian image, that time and space are a platform or a container for events to unfold. And he study proposes to look at them as forms for our perception. As in, you cannot think of anything that is outside time and space. No event can be conceived.
So let's just underline that, so you've heard this. Forms of perception are very different because for Kant, he's talking about it in terms of time and space, but these are not separate entities. So he's really prefiguring, or pre-thinking the way in which, certainly in quantum physics, there is finally a collapse of time and space, where time becomes velocity.
Yes.
In distance.
Yes, no, I can see why you say that. What becomes very interesting in this approach is that he's also adding, precisely because it is not possible to conceive of anything that sits outside time and space. But at the same time, these are forms of perception, they are not absolute dimensions.
So they're like, you could say, using what Mark was talking about, a faculty.
Yeah, they belong to that part of potentiality.
Mm-hmm.
They're completely open, completely undefined, pure time and space. And they belong to, as faculty, they belong to the subject that is trying to engage. What comes out of it is that experience is not the first contact with the world, but is an already packaged element with time and space. And the unpackaged is forever.
And
lost
what does
on
that
the
mean
other
that's already packaged? Mattia, don't answer that. Somebody else answer that. Stuart, why don't you answer that?
So that the raw data is picked up by the senses through this faculty of time and space, and that packages it.
Well, time and space is not a faculty. I shouldn't have put it that way, but it's a potential. It's a dimension. Let's call it just a dimension, or this. But you're right. I mean, it's a good guess. Let's think of it again. Let's see if you can figure out what is it about experience that makes an a priori synthetic unity. So what you're saying is that Kant does talk about experience. He is trying to privilege the right to use your senses, your taste, your not just taste as in taste, but as in preference, as a quality. He's trying to sort of give these some sort of substance. So how is it that he then discounts experience? So how can experience both be important and not important? I know you want to answer this. You got to say it really loud because Mark needs to hear you. Mario needs to hear you.
I think what he talks about a priori cognition, but from that first page of the introduction, where he says the question is something about like, can it be entirely independent of like experience? So, like, can the composite of the a priori cognition, can the composite of the sensible impression be an event from that, and in that sense a priori, rather than being an event that relates to the experience? So that's the split where he's like, it's like the moment of the virtual.
Okay, let's try it this way. I'm gonna have you and Stuart. Sorry, Stuart. Stuart's thesis, as everyone knows or may know, is partly dealing with walking. Just walking in the landscape, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, how is it that you're going to avoid the massive pitfall of experience, or do you want to privilege that in your thesis? Like when you're walking, well, I'm probably not humming to yourself, but maybe you are humming. How is it that experience will not enter into your thing. How is it with any of your works that you don't secretly have experience somehow going, yeah, turn to the right. Now what does this thing experience? Wouldn't it have something to do with walking in the woods and doesn't experience enter this at all? It's a red herring. I realize that.
Does it rest on principle though?
Well, if you rest things on principles, which is not necessarily a tragedy, you could end up with a very sterilized knowledge. And the one thing that Kant's trying to do is unsterilize the knowledge.
Fertilized knowledge.
Fertilized knowledge, thank you. Yes, and how does experience both come into play and not become privileged? Or what do we mean by the word experience? Anybody want a thumbnail approach to it?
This is a question that I just said it in rubbish.
Are you answering the question, what is an experience?
Well, yeah.
Okay, I take it as a no, but anyway, go on. What page?
It's on that introduction, first page.
Page 127, for example?
136.
136, okay.
Introduction before 126.
What?
It's pure reason you're looking at.
Yeah, I'm looking at pure reason.
Okay, yeah, that's not experience.
There's whether there is any such cognition independent of all experience and even of all impressions of the senses. So,
Let's read the first sentence then. Can you read out loud there, Lauren? There is no doubt, that one. And for those of you who don't have it, I have it on the board over there. Isn't that amazing? Of course, nobody can, I don't know if you can see that.
Right. There is no doubt whatever that all our cognition begins with experience.
Okay, great. Now we've just said that he is fighting against that very fact. Now he starts off by saying this. Sounds contradictory.
So,
okay, next sentence, or next part.
well, how else should the cognitive faculty be awakened into exercise?
Okay. And what's the answer before everybody rushes to the end of the paragraph?
Well, I think it's first of all I saying about the Aristotelian.
Right.
That how come there's no sense without something to sense? We have the senses, but they need something to sense. So he's talking to that in that first sentence. But
Say that again. I don't think people heard you.
we have senses, but we need something to stimulate them. Without that, they are nothing. So that's why he says everybody has to have that sense of experience. But what he's going to say is that there's a pure transcendental categorical understanding, which is other than the experience.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, which are the rules, which are not in human and in process, they were just regulatory. But here he's saying Newton found some rules, these are laws, these are rules, these transcendental ideas. We've already got the time and space. Another one would be cause and effect. It's a pure primary understanding. Every effect has a cause. That's what he would say. If you then say from experience that this object is moved by something else, the cause and effect in the world there, is because that a metaphysical experience. So you have this pure understanding. Now we're saying just this one categorical cause and effect here, which you can say always is a rule. There's always an effect, always a cause. That's what he wants to say, and it's like Newtonian, that kind of thing. Then with the world and experience, that's different. That may or may not be. That might need some more cognitive, theoretical, practical judgment.
Okay. Sally.
Yes?
Now that you're choking. All right.
Sorry?
Are you okay?
Yes, I'm alright.
Can you translate what Mark just said?
No.
Dane, you want to give it a go?
Okay. We can look at the same problem from the point of view of another traditional concept that Kant puts interest in, which is the notion of essence.
No. Don't go there yet. Just translate what Mark said.
Oh, well, it's more or less.
Oh, that's easy. Oh,
No,
wow.
that's what I said before. I mean, Kant concentrates on the mode of knowledge, and these modes are the famous definition is that intuitions are blind and ideas are hollow or empty. In other words, the problem he was facing was the partition of the field between empiricists and rationalists before him, that, to sum it up very bluntly, in very basic terms, the empiricists moved from the position that there is nothing in the mind that didn't first go through the senses, and the rationalists replying saying, yes, but the mind must have some tools to organize this data, otherwise this data remains just individual bits of information and no knowledge will ever come out of it. And they kept going in and out of these endless variations.
And by the way, they still keep doing this.
And Kant comes up with something that at first appears as a compromise because it keeps the two things together. But actually, this compromise, the whole methodology, the whole epistemological structure changes because it brings what was absolute and outside, the dimension of time and space, causality as existing per se, the teleology of the world caused by God as a God over there, as modes of thinking information belonging to the subject.
Alberto, you want to translate that? Say it again.
What was absolute, time and space conceived as a neutral stage for events to happen. Causality as a reason, a necessary reason for things to be as they are. Teleology as the desire unprescriptible to us of God that the world would go in a certain direction.
And unfold for the purpose. Yeah.
All these were outside and were eternal. They never evolved in time. They sort of constituted the horizon, the stage on which the world and our lives existed. And Kant says instead, if we think of these not as absolutes, but as form for organizing our engagement with the world, then we can have a ground in this sense, because then we are certain that our packaged object of experience is sharing these modes of being packaged, if you like, this kind of rough. And we are no longer tangled in asking, when I put a finger in the flame, is the pain in the flame and then pass into my finger, or is in my finger first, why it doesn't burn without the flame of the candle, and so forth. Questions that were actually discussed by John Locke and others. They seem a bit naive now, but that was the kind of problematic that was faced. By moving these inside the subject, it becomes a thorough scientific mode of questioning, because one says, well, I cannot ask matter, tell me what you are, tell me how you function, because if I speak to the table, it doesn't answer. But if I start with an whole set of possible tools, measuring it in one way or another, then I have that measurement made with that tool that can be compared with the other measurement made with the other tool, and so forth. And then there is a possibility of exchange and of managing information.
Changed slightly in the end. It was okay. Okay, Dane, you want to give it a go?
Well, he's changing the transcendent notions of transcendent to a transcendental.
Yes, can you explain that? I knew that we would not be able to leave that out. Okay, so where we are right now, and we'll circle back to the introduction, is that somehow, so Mattia and Mark were basically suggesting how something that is perceived as immovable and sort of out there, so whether or not it's Archimedean point like God, that then gives meaning to, its object, the world, Earth, whatever the thing is, A, or B, it's time and space out there that ends up giving sort of substance and shape to things so that they are what they are. Kant's move is to bring it so that the assemblage of everything is the package, and that brings inside, as it were, except there is no inside, but it brings within the package everything that there is. So it becomes, so that experience isn't jettisoned out, but it's not jettisoned out. It's just not the absolute that causes one to understand or not understand. And so what that really is a move in Kant from what is called transcendence to the transcendental. Now, what is that? Because now you spoiler number 2. Yes, what is that?
What the
transcendental versus the transcendent.
Well, transcendent is something that's outside that gives meaning, that gives form or purpose, and whatever to subject. So the subject is subjected to,
Hence called subject.
yeah, to whatever the transcendent
Being,
thing
entity is.
Yes.
And transcendent sounds very religious, doesn't it? And why does it sound religious?
Because it is.
God, not the argument. Yes, but what is it about the word transcendent that connects with religion? It didn't work, did it? Not like that. Nobody gets that?
Well, God's the only one giving that meaning.
Yes, but what's happening in this?
The cross.
And what happened in the cross?
Crucifixion.
Yes, let's
Transcends
move on.
It transcends the life and death of the human
Transcends
body.
human form.
Yes, good. And how does that happen? Okay, I realize that this is not the most religious group here. Doesn't anybody know what happens on the cross? Doesn't anybody know the story of the cross? No, not the doubt. Jeez.
Salvation.
What?
To do with salvation.
God dies on the cross.
Okay, okay, so God or Jesus or anyway, the Son of God dies on the cross, right? And then what happens? Jesus.
There's an earthquake.
There's an earthquake, thank you.
No, it's true, yeah.
That's right, yes.
And so, like, this
Something
affects-
very wrong is happening.
good.
Jesus. No, that's not what happened. Okay.
Well, the body's taken down, put in a cave,
And then what happens?
On the
and then the
third
body's
day,
disappeared.
it rose.
The body disappears.
Well, they roll back the. I'm learning this from the
This is
my
a very
children.
8-year-old discussion.
Yeah, I'm learning it.
That's right.
It's a 7-year-old.
Okay, so go on. What happens now? So
So
the body
the body
disappears.
of Jesus is put into the cave 3 days later. The
Yes.
cave is
3 days
opened,
later.
the body's gone.
And people think what? A, he's gone for a coffee break. B,
They're
He-
taking his body away.
someone say like, or C,
Transcended.
Oh my God, that's so tiring. Yes, he transcends. And what?
Nobody ascends.
He ascends.
Yeah.
He ascends.
Yeah,
and
but
then
it
what
doesn't-
happens?
it doesn't transcend.
No, but then what happens? When he
Transcends like
ascends,
that.
okay, and then what happens?
He turns into bread,
He
transubstantiates.
doesn't turn into bread.
So in one direction he transubstantiates, and the other he ascends. But I don't think
Yeah,
he
but then it's
transcends.
a transcendence of the mortality
I wonder
of the
Kant
human
is so
body
difficult.
because it resurrects.
Sorry.
It's a transcendence of the mortality of the human body because it resurrects.
Because what happens?
It resurrects.
Oh, he resurrects, right?
Resurrects.
God, I
So
didn't
it
know that.
transcends the mortality, the finitude of the human body.
Okay.
Okay, you alright with that?
But Lazarus was doing that before.
Okay,
No,
so
he does it to Lazarus.
Yes,
who
but I
does
mean,
it to Lazarus?
right,
Jesus.
but I mean,
He
at that
was
point you
alive.
don't need to get in the cross. If you just do that like when you were alive, then what's the problem? I mean, you already beat the dead.
Okay, great. But we at least understand the notion of the transcendent, right? Now, the transcendent doesn't mean ascendance, but it does have that feel to it because what the word implies is a coming back to earth in some sort of other modified form. So bread.
Might cause transcends ideas of reason that are not met within experience.
Right.
So things like the God, the world, the cosmos are all ideas of reason that we don't actually meet with experience. And there's, I always want to jump in and say there's all these other little words like society, which you don't really
Or edge. Edge of the world.
Ideas of reason. And they are different from the transcendental categorical understanding which meets and answers to things in experience. That's the difference between the transcendental and the transcendent science stuff.
Yeah, not, might be a little bit of a, not quite. Let's see if, I don't wanna get too far, yes, I mean, the transcendental is going to have a little bit more substance to it. It's gonna allow for certain faculties to operate and other ones not to. So it's very important that one gets a hold of how this transcendental actually becomes an imperative for the ground.
There is, since Mark mentioned ideas, especially the three ideas: nature, the cosmos,
World, yeah.
the world, and then God.
That's right.
Are projection to infinity of all these single individual instances that one can meet in experience in space and time. So it becomes very interesting then to think, even just linguistically, there are endless declinations of
Do you mean
being,
declensions?
of being. I am, we are, I was, we might be, they were. But being per se is never to be found. That's not. It becomes a problem of Heidegger afterwards. So being per se is more than the sum of all the examples, because it also contains the possibility of all the other examples that have actually happened. And it's a projection to infinity of all those. It becomes a unity or a solid ground only to infinity, which is paradoxical because infinity is never met. Therefore, it remains transcendental.
Lily, what did you hear from that?
Transcendental.
Yes.
So that's what you said sound to me a bit like Plato idea.
No, it's moving away from that in the diametrically opposed way.
And why does it sound like Plato? Because you're thinking of
Just
categories.
because, well, when you were talking about the fact that it's more than the sum of all the possibility that are already, not the possibility, it's more than the sum of the acts, and it's all the possibilities as well, and goes towards
The possibilities are not listed. Well, to me, the best way to describe what is transcendental is language.
Okay.
We use language. It is not exhausted by any of us, not by the literature either, and yet is nowhere else to be found. That's precisely what the transcendental concept, the concept of transcendental is. So space is always encountered in objects attached to matter, not by itself. And it is by itself. At least it makes no sense to be approached or addressed by itself. And so is causality, and so is the notion of God or of nature.
Okay, let's now open the books so that we. I think we should go
Does that make
to.
sense?
Yeah, but like, can we have like concepts that are not transcendental at that point?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that is the attack for, let's say, quantum physics, the quantum theory crowd. They are objecting to having anything that's even transcendental. So
they want to reduce it more to the phenomenal level.
Yeah.
But that becomes empirical. I like that you're like laid on the fact that you can't approach to any.
I think that
further.
there is a problem that hasn't been resolved, but the empirical requires a form of observation, and I would suggest that that argument doesn't require observation. It doesn't require a proof in the usual sense of a science proof. So that's where like the Cantor set, which we haven't gotten into yet, but that's where these kind of mathematical environments can establish some kind of path without having to go into a transcendental move. But at the moment, to be honest with you, you only have maybe 3 or 4 major ways into asking the question of the ground. One is the transcendent. So you have this Archimedean point that gives meaning to something. So let's say then your work is on the role of knitting in China. I mean, to put it in just sort of, and you're taking as a given that this thing called China, which who knows what that really means, but China is giving meaning to knitting. Now, that would not hold up, I'm not saying you're doing that, but that argument would not hold up in a PhD world, because it would be taking its object of, in this case, China, and applying it to the subject, in this case, knitting, in such a way that it already would claim meaning. You might run into the same kind of problem with the notion of looking at Chinese art in a curatorial scenario, because you might fall into the trap of putting forward a transcendent in order to create your argument. Okay, so in order to not do that, move number 2 is to try and offer like a so-called transcendental move, or actually, I'll just say transcendental move, which says that the entire thing that you're dealing with is embodying its sort of delimitations create the way in which one's going to look at the field, and however wide your limitations are is however wide the field can be, and you try and organize the argument around how it allows you to start here and not over there, and that is set up via this move on the transcendental. So it gives you an ability to say, well, I started over here as opposed to over here, and not like, well, I just started over here because, I don't know, it was sunny, I decided to start. That won't work. So in order, that may be secretly how you really started, but that's not going to hold. So you need a way to talk about how you actually frame the thing without giving it a constricting frame. And so the transcendental turns out to be one of the ways to do this. Another way to do this, which we haven't talked about in this seminar yet, is the dialectical way, which is very close to transcendental, except for that it argues that the logic of the entire field is held within one system. Kant is bringing up 2 systems. The third way is probably the way that people are going at the moment, which is sort of not really finished, which is, I guess, it would be the sort of Heideggerian notion of the event kind of way. Although I think that the arguments that you're putting forward in Bataille with this auditory move gets close to that. It sort of breaks with both that dialectical text language based scenario and moves in this other direction. And it moves in another direction that's very different than the ones that are usually put forward, who end up getting recuperated into language again. But anyway, so that event becomes this kind of notion that, well, what is an event? Don't say anything, Lauren. Right? But the notion of the event is this kind of other sort of methodological way. So those are basically the 4 different ways. And your thesis, every one of your theses is going to fall in one of those. And you need to know in some way, I mean, you don't have to know the, like, sort of the really horrible details down to the telescope to the very minimum, what Kant is actually saying, unless that becomes a feature of your work. But it would help if you knew, if you're dealing with transcendental, transcendent, synthetic unities, a priori synthetic unities, like how does it actually give you your right to say whatever it is you want to say? Tia, what were you going to say?
No.
Okay. Ed, were you going to say something on that?
No.
I'll go to
So in this example of thesis, methods of a thesis, like,
yeah.
so the transcendental would be like an organism, like that you start with some elements, and then these elements found their own way to make sense, and they build up, and then they create something.
Yes.
Whereas the transcendent would be like an object that casts the shadow.
Good. Yeah, nice. And that shadow then starts to name.
Yeah, and then you want to trace the limits of the shadow. You analyze the shadow, and then you might realize that actually you just were I don't know, joking yourself,
Mhm.
because you realized that you started from the assumption that you already knew what you were what you were aiming to.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Yes, okay. And now we fill in the bones and the skin and the hair, or whatever you want to put it. We've got things like faculties, analytics, architectonics. These are all part of this thing of the transcendental. They're all tools of the trade. And that's what it's important to sort of get a sense of how this thing's time, how this thing's space is playing around with those analytics. Chris, did you want to say anything on this? No, not yet. Zen? No? So